Hi guys, this is Mr. Tan, and today we're doing business research, and we're coming to the final section, which is the conclusion, and we're going to be reviewing the structure of the conclusion chapter and looking at writing the conclusion chapter. But bear in mind, after this, in some instances, you will need to do a presentation of your findings as well. So the session outcomes, by the end of the session, so you should be able to develop the conclusion of the research project in terms of contributing to existing literature, recommendations, suggestions for the future, and limitations of the study. So the structure of the dissertation or business research, with the abstract, introduction, literature review, methodology, results, findings. We had previously the discussion, and now we're on to the conclusion. So the conclusion chapter. So the conclusion of a research reaffirms the thesis statement, discusses the issues, and research is a final judgment. The conclusion is not a summary. It is a belief based on your reasoning and on the evidence you have accumulated. This is the place to share with readers the conclusions you have reached because of your research. So the purpose of a conclusion is, to tie together, to integrate the various issues of research covered in the body of the thesis, and to make comments upon the meaning of it all. This also includes noting any implications resulting from your discussion of the topic, as well as recommendations, forecasting future trends, and the need for future research. The purpose of the conclusion, continued, seeks to tie together, integrate, and synthesize the various issues raised in the discussion sections whilst reflecting the introductory thesis statement or objectives. And it provides answers to the thesis research question as well as identifying the theoretical and policy implications of the study, with respect to the overall study area, as well as highlighting the study limitations, and provides direction and areas for future research. So what should the content of a good conclusion chapter contain? So this should include, it should be a logical ending, synthesizing what has previously been discussed and never contain any new information or material. It must pull together all the parts of your argument and refer the reader back to the focus you have outlined in your introduction and to the central topic, and thereby create a sense of unity. It must be very systematic, brief, and never contain any new information. It should be preferably less than or equal to about 5 pages. And finally, it should add to the overall quality and the impact of the research. So the structure of the conclusion chapter, list down what you think the structure of the conclusion chapter in your project should be. You got 10 minutes. So let's look at the structure of the conclusion chapter. So the conclusion, must have a clear structure that is able to hold the attention of the examiner. So it should really contain the following: an introduction, synthesis or empirical findings, as answers to research or questions or contribution to study, theoretical and policy, implications, direction, recommendations of further research, and state the limitations of the study. Writing the introduction section. So, the conclusion chapter should have a definite introduction which draws the attention of the reader to the thesis statement upon which the researcher was conducted. So your thesis statement, your what you're trying to determine in terms of the problem, opportunity, or hypothesis, trying to prove or disprove. So it should really be focused back to that question. So it should have, the aims of the chapter. The introduction should restate the research question and objectives that the study was set out to answer and clearly justify the necessity of such a course. It's there to establish the context, background, and or importance of the topic, indicate a problem, controversy, or a gap in the field of study, and the summary of structure of the conclusion chapter. So some of the strategies for developing a good introduction should be the content and structure of the introduction, including beginning with a sentence that refers to the main subject of the discussion in a dissertation or research project. Indicate the importance of the subject discussed. Restate the research questions as presented in the introduction chapter. Doing this reinforces the importance of the study, and its findings. And it's important to go back to the research question, and even perhaps touching upon parts of the literature review, and linking that back to your data and analysis, and then back to the literature review in terms of if it proves or disproves anything, and finally the implications of that, and if it meets your research question, if you've actually answered the question one way or another. So let's look at a conclusion chapter, a sample introduction. So this could include the following. The study was set out to explore the content of sustainable livelihoods and has identified the nature and form of livelihood diversification in Ghana. The reasons and motivation for diversification, the type, the extent, resources required for diversification, and the role and impact of intervention on the household economy was well-being. The study also sought to know whether livelihood diversification can result in effective poverty reduction, particularly in small farm households. The general theoretical literature on this subject, and specifically in the context of Africa, is inconclusive on several vital questions within a diversification discourse. The study sought to answer two of these questions. Do rural households diversify with survival or accumulation? Does rural household diversification reduce risk effectively? Conclusion chapter, sample 2. So it's a second sample here. The main empirical findings are chapter specific and were summarized within the respective empirical chapters. You state the titles of your empirical chapter. This section will synthesize the empirical findings to answer the study's two research questions. 1. Do rural households diversify for accumulation of wealth or survival? A. Savings and capital outlay are significantly small. Nearly all households in the study feel that diversification only enhances their ability to survive and serves as a source of insurance against indebtedness. Nevertheless, the need for borrowing and asset smoothing is still, recurrent. And B, persistent lack of security. The majority of households highlighted the lack of income security as a factor and caused them to diversify, but they still do not enjoy any security. And C, financial and labor scarcity. Many of the sampled households depend on traditional herbal clinics for no other reason than that they are far less expensive than the orthodox medical treatment. This pattern cannot be an indication of accumulation, especially when individuals cannot provide for their basic necessities or life in spite of their diversification. So here we've had two examples of conclusion chapters. So, and then you have your contribution, stroke interpretation. You need to think about what do the findings results actually mean? Are the findings consistent with previous research, or do they counter previous findings, or have you found something new? Post it, why this might be, particularly if your findings differ from others. Focus on points of comparison that bear on findings. And implications. So what? How the results might be generalized. May have other implications. New things to consider as a result of the findings. Limitations of the study. Be thoughtful and reasonable in terms of what the limitations were of the study. In terms of time, resources, money. Could you have gone deeper? Don't beat yourself up. Acknowledge issues of scientific concern and don't trash the validity of your own study. So, empirical findings contribution. So, thank you today from Mr. Tan on the final section of the conclusion of your research project.